This compilation of classic video clips presents the U.S. involvement in Latin America. Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, and Mao, their political views were very appealing to the large indigenous and mestizo population of Latin America. It inspired great thinkers such as José Martí and Mariátegui to challenge the old Spanish colonial order. However, the expanding U.S. empire wanted to control Latin American markets. This is what I like to call the Banana Wars.
I'm Chiquita Banana, and I've come to say bananas have to ripen in a certain way, and when they're flecked with brown and have a golden hue, bananas taste the best and are the best for you.
But bananas brought hundreds of thousands of deaths.
The United Fruit Company of Boston owned 500,000 acres of land, the railroad, the port, and telecommunications. But most Guatemalan peasants found it difficult to survive. In 1950, Jacobo Arbenz was voted president. He wasn't a communist, but some of his close allies were. A former military man, Arbenz sought to modernize Guatemala's backward society. Washington was alarmed.
U.S. Secretary of State Dulles takes the rostrum to urge united action by the Americas to outlaw international communist intervention in the Western Hemisphere.
This conference was shocked by the dastardly attack on members of the United States Congress by those who professed to be patriots. They may not themselves have been communists, but they had been subjected to the inflammatory influence of communism, which avowedly uses extreme nationalism as one of its tools.
This is the first time in the history of the world that the communist government has been overthrown by the people. And for that we congratulate you and the people of Guatemala for the support they have given.
Nixon praises Castillo Armas, the president of Guatemala, for overthrowing a communist regime.
In other words, the Arbenz regime was not a Guatemalan government. It was a foreign government controlled by foreigners.
Controlled by Moscow.
And that happened just here in the continent, right here in America, just here in America.
What Nixon doesn't say is that Castillo Armas was handpicked by the CIA. That his army was financed and trained by the CIA, and that Castillo Armas didn't lead a popular uprising against a communist regime, but was the head of a CIA-sponsored military coup. The man who devised the coup, the American Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, a zealous Cold Warrior. The mastermind of the coup is brother Allen Dulles, director of the CIA, a veteran of covert operations. The man who orchestrated the propaganda campaign, Agent E. Howard Hunt, who later became the notorious Watergate burglar. Their target? A man they called Red Jacobo. To the world, he is Jacobo Arbenz, the elected president of Guatemala. Arbenz makes a fatal political error. He takes land from an American company, gives it to peasants, and ignites the Cold War in Latin America.
The UN met in emergency session. Guatemala City was strafed from the air. Rebels invaded from Honduras. The CIA spread panic. Washington denied responsibility.
The information available to the United States thus far strongly suggests that the situation does not involve aggression, but is a revolt of Guatemalans against Guatemalans.
The Soviets were warned.
Stay out of this hemisphere, and don't try to start your plans and your conspiracies over here.
The American PB Success campaign brought the government down and drove Arbenz and his wife into exile. 9,000 of his supporters were arrested. Many were kept in jail without trial for years. Among those who fled was a young Argentine doctor, Ernesto Che Guevara, who went to Mexico and there met Fidel Castro.
Recuerdo mis conversaciones con él, que estaba
I remember my talks with him.
terriblemente indignado y amargado.
He was terribly indignant and embittered by these events, which had interrupted an endeavor which wasn't even radical.
Era una experiencia radical.
It was a relatively simple change, land reform, which was very just and necessary.
Tan necesaria.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba.
This is the beginning of the so-famous Fidel Castro, El Che Guevara, who are the icons of communism in Latin America, inspiring most of the guerrilla movements throughout Latin America. Now let's move with the 80s to see what happens in El Salvador.
During the 1980s, the years of Ronald Reagan in the White House, a trail of carnage and grief was blazed across Central America. I reported America's war against Nicaragua, which had the temerity to overthrow a Washington-backed dictator, Somoza. The CIA attacked Nicaragua with death squads known as the Contra.
Throughout Central America, protest mounted against right-wing military rule. In El Salvador, the Catholic Church had become a haven for the oppressed. On the concrete steps of the cathedral in San Salvador, the military decreed that demonstrators for human rights should be discouraged. Nothing very new for El Salvador. In a massacre in 1932, the military had killed up to 40,000 people. In 1979, the cameras were on hand to record the color of the blood. Archbishop Oscar Romero was the cautious leader of Salvadorian Catholics. When he spoke out, the reaction from the right was immediate.
For the first time, the church decides to take sides with the poor, turning into another war called liberation theology.
Many theologians in the 60s and 70s adopted Marx's ideas, baptized them with biblical stories and terminology, and formed liberation theology. Liberation theologians teach that radical political transformation is the central component of living out the Christian faith. Revolutionary action is the way to make Christian love effective for the poor. If Christians don't get involved in the revolutionary struggle and respond to the poor's yearning for liberation, they become the oppressors. Since Jesus speaks to the poor, Christians not committed to the revolution have turned their backs on Christ. In liberation theology, commitment to the revolution is essential to what it means to be a Christian.
Like the Sandinistas in neighboring Nicaragua, the Salvadorian guerrillas wouldn't give up. The war damage was immense. In the United States, the new Reagan administration blamed Cuba and Moscow.
What we are watching is a four-phased operation. Phase one has been completed, the seizure of Nicaragua. Next is El Salvador, to be followed by Honduras and Guatemala. It's clear and explicit.
There is a Caribbean domino theory that's unfolding.
Well, I wouldn't call it necessarily a domino theory. I would call it a priority target list, a hit list, if you will, for the ultimate takeover of Central America.
Look, if a Soviet-Cuban master plan had actually existed, we would have won the Cold War. If there had been a master plan. But unfortunately, there was no such plan. Quite the opposite. Cuba's actions conflicted with Soviet interests at that time.
During the 70s and 80s, the war took place in South America, hitting Chile, Argentina, Paraguay, Brazil, Colombia. Under one main operation controlled by the United States, it was called Operación Condor, the Condor Operation. The death toll surpasses 100,000 people.
In 1970, the people of Chile made the mistake of electing a socialist prime minister, Salvador Allende. Allende was the people's choice, but he wasn't the CIA's choice, so they spent $8 million to get rid of him. On September the 11th, 1973, General Augusto Pinochet and his army marched on Santiago, the capital of Chile, and stormed the palace. Salvador Allende was killed in the process. With Pinochet in power, violence, corruption and torture quickly spread throughout Chile.
And newly released archives show President Richard Nixon and his then National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger privately admitted to a CIA assassination attempt in Chile. Nixon and Kissinger were in the midst of a campaign to overthrow Chilean President Salvador Allende at the time of the tape in June 1971. On the recording, Kissinger and Nixon joke about a CIA attempt to kill the top Chilean army commander who supported Allende. The general, Rene Schneider, was killed in 1970 by right-wing Chilean military forces. In an apparent reference to Schneider and the CIA, Kissinger says, quote, "When they did try to assassinate somebody, it took 3 attempts and he lived for 3 weeks afterwards." Kissinger has long claimed the CIA broke off contact with Schneider's killers before the 3rd attempt on his life. The U.S. helped overthrow Allende 3 years later, leading to a military takeover by General Augusto Pinochet.
By the late 70s, most of Latin America was controlled by dictators, including those like Pinochet, who were openly fascist. All of them were backed, directly and indirectly, by the United States. They sent their henchmen to be trained here at the School of the Americas in Georgia. Officially, it was described as little more than a Boy Scout camp, teaching American values such as respect for human rights.
The doctrine that was taught was that if you want information, you use physical abuse, you use false imprisonment, you use threats to family members, you use virtually any method necessary to get what you want.
Torture?
And killing.
Not long ago, a man of courage and conviction stepped forward and laid down a challenge.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
President Reagan not only helped bring down the Berlin Wall, he brought an end to the Cold War.
We have agreed to eliminate the world's most dangerous weapons, heavy ICBMs, and all other multiple warhead ICBMs, and dramatically reduce our total strategic nuclear weapons. Certainly, I agree with what President Yeltsin said, that there is no animosity. The Cold War days are over, and he came here in a spirit of forward movement on these arms control agreements, and that speaks for itself.
Why did Washington attack such tiny countries? Because the weaker they are, the greater the threat. People who can free themselves against all the odds are sure to inspire others.
Today, after hundreds of thousands being killed,
in town,
hundreds of millions of dollars wasted, we have reclaimed South American continent, which today we call it UNASUR.